The storm had started hours ago, a relentless whiteout swallowing the highway in an endless cascade of snow. The plow in front of me was barely visible, its flashing orange lights distorted by the thick sheets of ice swirling in the wind. I had been working these roads for years, clearing them through the worst winters, but something about this storm felt wrong. The air was too still beneath the howling wind, the cold too sharp, as if the storm carried something inside it, something unseen, waiting. I kept my truck steady, following the lead plow as we cut through the drifts. The radio crackled occasionally, my supervisor's voice breaking through the static, checking in on us. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have prepared me for what came next. I blinked just for a second, and the plow ahead of me was gone. Not slowed down, not veered off course, just gone. My headlights shone ahead, illuminating only the unbroken snow where it had been seconds before. No tire tracks, no sign of a crash, just smooth, undisturbed whiteness stretching into the night. I slammed the brakes, my truck groaning as it skidded slightly, the tires struggling for grip. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, this is Riggs. I lost visual on Carson's plow. 1 second he was right in front of me, and now he's just gone. No tracks, no nothing. Do you copy? Only static answered me. I tried again. Still nothing. The snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, muffling the world around me. I hesitated, then put the truck into park and grabbed my flashlight. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, but I had to check. Carson had to be out here somewhere. Maybe I had just missed him turning off the road. The wind clawed at me the moment I stepped out, cutting through my jacket like razor wire. I trudged forward, my boots sinking deep into the snow as I reached the place where the other plow should have been. I swept my flashlight over the ground, searching for anything, tracks, wreckage, anything at all. There was nothing. It was impossible. A vehicle that big, that heavy, didn't just vanish. Then I saw it. A shape ahead barely visible through the swirling snow. A truck. Carson's plow. But something was wrong. The engine was still running, its headlights on, casting long beams of light into the storm. But the cab was empty. The door was hanging open. Snow had already begun to pile inside. Carson? My voice barely carried over the way. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight inside. His radio was still on, hissing with low static, but there was no sign of him. His gloves sat on the seat, covered in a thin layer of frost. I turned, scanning the area with my light. That's when the radio crackled. A voice came through, faint, distant, but unmistakable. My voice. Lost visual on Carson's plow. No tracks. Do you copy? My blood turned to ice. That was my own transmitter, the one I had sent just minutes ago. The radio hissed again, and then the voice changed. Rig whispered. The flashlight flickered in my hand. The wind seemed to die from, leaving only silence, thick and suffocating. Then I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, crunching through the snow. I turned so fast I nearly lost my footing. There was nothing there, just the swirling snow, endless and empty. Then the plow's headlights flickered. A shadow moved inside the cab. I froze. The driver's seat was no longer empty. A figure sat there, hunched forward, hands gripping the wheel. I took a step back. My heart slammed against my breath coming in short gasps. The figure didn't. It was watching, though I couldn't see its face. Then, slowly, it lifted one hand and waved. I ran. I don't remember getting back to my truck. I don't remember slamming the door shut or throwing it into drive. I just remember the cut through the storm, my breath, my skin crawling with a terror I couldn't In the rearview, I saw the plow's head. The wind screamed against the cabin, rattling the windows as if something outside was desperate to get in. The snow had been falling for hours, thick and endless, burying the world beneath a suffocating white silence. I had never felt so isolated in my life. It had been 2 days since James left. He had gone to get supplies before the worst of the storm hit, promising he'd be back before nightfall. That was 48 hours ago. No calls, no texts, nothing but the sound of the wind and the steady ticking of the old wooden clock on the wall. I tried to tell myself he was fine. Maybe the roads were closed. Maybe he had to stay in town until the weather cleared. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. James wouldn't have left me alone this long. He knew how much I hated being out here by myself. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, staring at the flickering glow of the fireplace. The storm outside roared, a constant howl that seemed to grow louder with every passing hour. Then, beneath the wind, I heard it. A voice, faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was calling my name. I sat up, heart hammering. I must have imagined it. The wind played tricks on us. Everyone knew that. But then I heard it again. Lena! My breath caught in my throat. It was James. I jumped to my feet, rushing to the window. The snow outside was thick, shifting in the wind. But beyond the trees, I saw movement. A shadow. A figure. James! My voice came out hoarse, my throat tight with relief and fear. No answer. I fumbled for my coat, barely pausing to shove my boots on before throwing open the door. The wind hit me like a wall of ice, stealing my breath. I stepped onto the porch, squinting through the swirling snow. "James!" I shouted. "Lena!" His voice came from deeper in the woods now, just past the tree line. My stomach twisted. Something didn't feel right. Why wasn't he coming closer? I hesitated, my fingers gripping the doorframe. The rational part of me screamed, "Don't go out there." But the part of me that loved James, that was terrified for. One. I stepped into the snow. Each step felt heavier, the cold biting through my jeans. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the tree line, peering into the darkness between the branches. The storm seemed quieter here, the wind muffled. Then I saw the footprints, a trail leading into the woods. James's? I followed them. Lena, closer now. I pushed forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The trees loomed around me, their bare branches swaying. The footprints continued deeper into the woods, vanishing into the darkness. Something was wrong. The prints, they weren't leading away from the cabin. They were leading toward it, from deeper in the woods. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The cold pressed against me, the silence growing heavier. Then, just behind me, too close, James's voice whispered, "Lena." I turned. Nothing. Only snow and shadows. The footprints were gone. The wind roared again, and with it came laughter. Low, unnatural, threading through the trees like something alive. I ran. The cold bit at my skin, the snow dragging at my legs. The cabin's lights flickered in the distance, a beacon in the storm. My heart pounded as I stumbled onto the porch, fumbling for the door handle. I wrenched it open and slammed it shut behind me, bolting it. My breath came in gasps, my body trembling. The wind outside howled, the storm raging on. Then, footsteps, software inside the cabin. A trail of melting snow led from the door to the bedroom. I never opened that door. The snowstorm had swallowed the town whole, burying roads, houses, and cars under feet of thick, suffocating white. It had been relentless for 2 days, the wind screaming against my windows, shaking the walls of my tiny cabin at the edge of the forest. I had always loved winter until now. I was alone, stranded. The power had gone out the night before, leaving me with only the dim glow of a lantern and the dying embers in the fireplace. My phone was useless, no signal, no connection to the outside world. Just me, the cold, and the unrelenting blizzard, and the footprints. I had seen them that morning, just outside my window. Deep, distinct prints leading from the woods to my cabin. But there were no prints leading away. At first I thought maybe I had tracked them in myself, but they were too large, and they weren't mine. I had been awake all night. I would have heard someone outside. The storm howled, shaking the walls, making it impossible to hear anything beyond its furious roar. But now, in the silence between the gusts, I swore I heard something else. A creak, a soft shuffle inside the cabin. My stomach clenched, my breath catching in my throat. I grabbed the lantern, holding it up as I slowly turned toward the hallway, leading to the back room. The dim light flickered, casting shifting shadows on the wooden walls. Another creak, closer this time. The sound of someone breathing. I took a slow, trembling step forward. The door to the back room was cracked open. I was sure I had left it closed. I swallowed, the lump in my throat thick and heavy. My fingers tightened around the lantern. "Hello?" I whispered. Silence. Then, a tap. Soft. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from inside the room. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt cemented to the floor. I reached the door, slowly pushing it open. The room was dark, empty, untouched, except for it was open. Snowflakes drifted in, melting onto the wooden floor. The footprints I had seen outside, they were inside, leading from the window to my bed. My breath hitched. The blankets were rumpled as if someone had been lying there, a deep indentation in the mattress, but no one was there. A gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering against my... The storm outside raged, drowning out all sound. But beneath it, I swore I heard it again, breathing, right behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't move. The whisper came so close. The cold breath brushed my ear. "You left the window open." The lantern flickered. The room went dark. The storm had turned the world into a swirling white void, burying everything beneath thick layers of snow. I had been driving for hours, trying to reach my parents' cabin before the roads became completely impassable. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the windshield despite the heat blasting from the vents. The GPS had already failed me miles back, losing signal in the storm. I was following the road signs now, relying on memory, but nothing looked right. The snow had swallowed every familiar landmark, leaving me stranded in an endless, unrecognizable landscape. Then, I saw the figure, a lone silhouette standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding over the ice before coming to a stop just feet away. My heart pounded as I stared through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A woman. She was barefoot, wearing only a thin nightgown, her long hair tangled and damp from the snow. She didn't move, didn't react to the headlights glaring in her face. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to keep driving, but I couldn't just leave her there. Not in this weather. I grabbed my phone, still no signal. Cursing under my breath, I reached for the door handle and stepped out into the freezing wind. "Hey, are you okay?" I shouted over the storm. She didn't answer. I took a cautious step forward. Her eyes were wide, glassy, her skin pale as the snow falling around us. "Do you need help?" She blinked slowly. Then, finally, she spoke. "He's coming." A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crawled up my spine. "Who?" I asked. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed past me toward my car. I turned and froze. There were footprints, deep, heavy prints in the snow, leading to my car. But they weren't mine. I had been alone. I'd seen no other cars, no signs of life for miles. And yet someone had walked right up to my driver's side door. The storm howled around us, the wind carrying a sound that I swore was laughter. I spun back around, my pulse hammering. But the woman was gone. Only the snow remained. No footprints, no sign she had ever been there. The wind screamed louder, rattling the car as I staggered backward, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, through the whirling snow, I saw it. A figure, sitting in the driver's seat of my car, waiting. I never made it to my parents' cabin. The storm had been relentless all night, thick snow piling against the windows of my remote cabin. The howling wind made it impossible to sleep, and the flickering fire in the hearth barely kept the bitter cold at bay. I pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders, staring at the shadows dancing along the walls. I was alone. At least I was supposed to be. The knocking had started just past midnight. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks at the front door. At first, I thought it was the wind, branches breaking, ice shifting, but then it happened again. 3 knocks, steady, expectant. I didn't move. My gut told me something was wrong. No one should be out here, not in this storm. The nearest town was miles away, and I hadn't seen another person in days. I forced myself to stand, my pulse hammering as I approached the door. The cabin's old wooden floors creaked beneath my feet. I hesitated, then called out, "Hello?" Silence. I reached for the doorknob, then stopped. A feeling, heavy and instinctual, clawed at my stomach. Something was waiting on the other side. I stepped back. The knocks came again. 3. Slow. Loud. I swallowed hard. Through the small window in the door, I could see nothing but swirling snow. No footprints, no shadows, nothing. Then, a voice, faint, muffled by the wind. "Let me in?" I shuddered. The voice wasn't desperate or pleading. It was calm. Too calm. I didn't answer. Seconds passed. The silence stretched. Then, the doorknob turned. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The lock held, but the knob twisted again. Harder this time. They were trying to get in. I grabbed the fireplace poker, gripping it tightly as I backed toward the kitchen. The door rattled in its frame, the knocking returning, louder, faster. I wasn't imagining it now. Something was out there. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The silence was worse. I stood frozen, my breath coming in short gasps. The wind howled, snow tapping against the windows like skeletal fingers. I waited, ears straining. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then, knock, knock, knock. But this time, it came from the back door. I turned so fast I nearly dropped the poker. That wasn't possible. There were no footprints outside, no sounds of movement. No way someone could have gotten back there so fast. The wind shrieked, making the cabin groan. My fingers tightened around the poker as I forced myself to move toward the back door. I had to see. I had to know. Slowly, I reached for the curtain covering the small window. I pulled it aside, and something was there. A face pressed against the glass, grinning, lips cracked and blue, eyes wide and unblinking, staring at me with something that wasn't human. I screamed, stumbling backward. The thing outside laughed, a dry, rasping sound fogging up the glass. Then it whispered my name. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember yanking the door open, running into the storm, my boots sinking into the snow. I only remember the wind swallowing my screams and the knocking still echoing behind me. The snowstorm had trapped me in the motel for 2 days. The roads were completely buried, and the power flickered in and out, leaving the halls dim and eerily silent. I was the only guest. The old man at the front desk had given me a key without a word, his sunken eyes barely meeting mine before disappearing into the back room. I didn't mind the isolation at first, but then the call started. The motel phone rang in the middle of the night. The sound was shrill, jarring in the quiet. I groggily reached for the receiver. "Hello?" At first, nothing. Just static, soft and distant. Then, a whisper. "Why did you take my room?" A shiver crawled down my spine. The voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. "What?" The line went dead. I stared at the receiver in my hand, my heart pounding. Slowly, I set it back down and turned on the lamp. The dim yellow light barely reached the corners of the room. Everything looked the same. The door was locked. The snowstorm raged outside, wind howling against the thin walls. I tried to convince myself it was just a wrong number. Then, at 3:13 a.m., the phone rang again. I didn't answer it. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was a dream. Almost. But when I went to the front desk, the old man wasn't there. The motel felt wrong. The silence pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating. I knocked on the office. No response. Then I noticed something. The guest book. It was open on the counter. I leaned over, scanning the names. There was only one listed, mine. The page before was blank. So was the one before that. In fact, all of them were. This place had no guests, no history. I swallowed hard and turned to leave when I saw the motel key hanging on the wall. Room 12, my room. And next to it, another key. Room 12, identical, rusted, hanging from a hook as if it had never been taken. I stepped back, my pulse hammering. That wasn't possible. I was in room 12. A sudden creak made me spin around. The hallway stretched before me, dim and lifeless. The doors stood closed, undisturbed. But I swore one had just moved. I turned and hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. My breath came in short gasps as I pressed my back against the wood, listening. Then, a knock. My stomach twisted, slow, deliberate, at my closet door. I hadn't opened the closet since I got here. My breath caught as I stared at the handle. It turned. The door creaked open an inch, revealing only darkness beyond, and then the motel phone rang. I didn't want to answer it. I couldn't. But the ringing wouldn't stop. With shaking hands, I picked up the receiver. Static. Then, the whisper. Get out of my room. The closet door swung open. The line went dead. The snowstorm had turned my night shift into a prison sentence. The roads were impassable. The wind howling against the gas station's windows like something alive, desperate to get in. I was the only one working, and given the weather, I didn't expect any customer. But at exactly 2:17 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I looked up from my phone, startled. A man had entered, his body wrapped in a heavy coat, hood pulled low over his face. Snow clung to his clothes, melting in slow drips onto the linoleum floor. Rough night, I said, forcing a chuckle. Didn't think anyone would be out in this mess. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked, slowly, to the back of the store, disappearing behind the shelves. Something about him made me uneasy. The way he moved, too stiffly. The way he had no footprints trailing behind him, despite the snow covering his boots. I leaned over the counter, trying to get a better look. The security cameras flickered, static crawling across the screens for a split second before stabilizing. The man was gone. I frowned. That wasn't possible. There was only one way in and one way out. I stepped around the counter, cautiously walking down the aisles. Sir? I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. The store was empty, but the bell had rung. I saw him. I turned back toward the counter and froze. The man was standing there, right in front of the register. His hood was still up, his face hidden. He hadn't made a sound. My mouth went dry. Can I help you? He slowly lifted his hand and pointed. I followed his gesture, toward the security monitors. The screens flickered again, distorting for a moment before showing something else. A new camera angle, one that didn't exist. It showed me, standing behind the counter. And behind me, the man. My stomach dropped. I whirled around. Nothing. The space behind me was empty. I turned back to the monitors. The screen now only showed static. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone, but before I could dial, the store lights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. A presence. Close. Too close. Then, the freezer doors behind me creaked open. Cold air rushed out, thick and heavy. I turned, my breath visible in the sudden chill. The rows of frozen food sat undisturbed, except for one door, standing wide open, and inside, a face, pale, motionless, eyes wide and unblinking, staring at me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a rack of chips. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then, the figure inside the freezer smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of cracked lips, and the bell above the door chimed again. But no one had entered. No one had left. I ran. I don't remember locking up. I don't remember getting in my car, only the feel of the ice-cold steering wheel beneath my shaking hands. The gas station was empty when I drove away, but as I passed by, the windows were no longer dark. Someone was standing inside, watching, still smiling. The snowstorm had swallowed the town whole. The roads were impassable. Power lines sagged under thick ice, and the world beyond my cabin's windows had vanished into a swirling white abyss. I was completely alone, or so I thought. It started with the footprints. I had just come inside after shoveling the porch, my boots soaked and my fingers numb. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows along the log walls, and I collapsed into the old rocking chair, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. Then I saw them, fresh footprints in the snow, leading up to my front door. A straight path, deep imprints, but there were no footprints leading away. A chill crept up my spine. I had just been out there. I would have seen someone. I stood slowly, heart pounding, and stepped to the window. The storm howled, snow whipping past in thick sheets. I squinted into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing, just the footprint. And then, a knock. I jolted, spinning toward the door. The sound had been soft, almost hesitant. I swallowed hard. No one should be here. My nearest neighbor was miles away, and the roads were buried. I waited, breath hitching. Another knock, softer this. I moved closer, reaching out with trembling fingers to unlock the door. My gut screamed at me to stop. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Then, a whisper, right against the door. "Let me in, it's cold out here." The voice was wrong, too flat, too hollow. I took a step back. The fire flickered, casting twisting shadows along the walls. My own reflection stared back at me from the window, pale and wide-eyed. And then, the doorknob turned. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The lock held, but the knob twisted again, harder this time. Whoever or whatever was outside was trying to get in. I grabbed the fire poker, gripping it tight. The door shuddered as if something was pressing against it. Then, the knocking started again, but now it was coming from the back door. My stomach dropped. That wasn't possible. The snow was untouched. I would have seen someone move around the cabin. The knocking grew insistent, pounding now, rattling the walls. I turned in circles, gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles ached. The firelight flickered wildly, the shadows twisting and stretching. Then, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room, thick and suffocating. And in that instant, I heard breathing, not my own. Close, too close. I wasn't alone. A single gust of cold air brushed against my neck. From inside the cabin, I ran. I didn't stop to grab my coat, didn't check behind me. I yanked the door open, plunging into the storm, the wind stealing the breath from my lungs. The snow was deep, nearly to my knees, but I kept running. Then, I risked a glance back. The cabin's windows were dark, empty, except there was someone standing inside, a shape barely visible in the flickering firelight, watching. And as the storm swallowed me, the last thing I saw was the front door swinging open. The snowstorm had turned my drive into a nightmare. The roads were nearly invisible under thick layers of ice, and my headlights barely cut through the swirling whiteout. I was on my way to visit my uncle's remote cabin, a trip I was beginning to regret. The GPS had given up miles ago. My phone had no signal, and the only light besides my headlights was the pale glow of the full moon, occasionally visible through the storm clouds. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in my high beams. I slammed on the brakes, my tires skidding on the frozen road. My car lurched to a stop, inches away from hitting him. A man stood in the middle of the road, unmoving. He was dressed in thin, tattered clothes, far too light for the freezing weather. His skin was pale, almost bluish, and he was barefoot. Snow had collected in his unkempt hair, and his eyes, wide and dark, locked onto mine. I stared, my breath fogging the windshield. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there, as if waiting. I swallowed hard and slowly rolled down the window. "Hey man, are you okay? You need a ride?" He didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. Just stared. A deep, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Something was wrong. I glanced at the passenger seat, debating whether to let him in. I couldn't just leave him out in the storm. I turned back to the road. He was gone. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't looked away for more than a second. I scanned the area frantically. The road was empty. The snow was untouched. He had vanished. A shiver ran down my spine. I quickly rolled up my window, locking the doors. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe. Then, something moved in my back seat. A faint rustling sound. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I looked into the rearview mirror. At first, I saw nothing, just darkness. Then, a shape. In the shadows, barely visible, a figure was sitting in my back seat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The same wide, dark eyes stared at me through the mirror. I gripped the steering wheel, my pulse pounding in my ears. My fingers hovered over the door handle, ready to run. But before I could react, a voice whispered from the back seat, "You should have kept driving." The overhead light flickered, and the last thing I saw was his reflection in the mirror, now smiling. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, turning my routine drive home into a slow crawl through an endless white void. The road was barely visible beneath the thickening snow, my headlights struggling to cut through the darkness. I had taken this route hundreds of times before, but tonight everything felt wrong. There were no other cars, no streetlights, no sound except the wind howling through the trees. Then, My radio crackled. At first, it was just static, but beneath the noise, I thought I heard something. A voice. "Don't stop!" The whisper was faint, almost lost in the static. I frowned, reaching for the dial. The static cut out. The radio went silent, and then a shadow moved across the road. I barely had time to react. My tires skidded as I slammed the brakes, my car coming to a stop just before hitting something. I squinted through the frost-covered windshield. A woman stood in the middle of the road. She was barefoot, her dress thin and tattered, her hair whipping around in the wind. Snow clung to her skin, but she didn't shiver, didn't even seem to breathe. She just stared at me. I swallowed hard and cracked my window. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond. Her eyes, dark, hollow, never left mine. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Something about her wasn't right. The wind howled louder, almost screaming through the trees. Then she moved. Not like a person. One second, she was standing in front of my car. The next, she was at my window. I yelped, jerking away. My breath fogged the glass between us. She was even paler up close, her skin almost translucent, lips cracked and blue, and her eyes empty. I scrambled for the gear shift, ready to floor it. Her hand slowly lifted, pressed against the window. The glass immediately frosted over beneath her palm. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then she spoke, a whisper barely audible over the storm. "You're not supposed to be here." A shiver ran through me, not from the cold. I put the car in reverse, heart hammering. The tires spun uselessly, the road now slick with ice. She watched me, unblinking, waiting. Then her head tilted, and she smiled. My radio burst to life. A voice, distorted, desperate, screamed through the speakers. "Don't look away!" I gasped, whipping my head toward the radio. A mistake, because when I looked back at the road, she was gone. The snow swirled in the empty space where she had stood. I didn't wait, didn't question. I hit the gas, my car finally lurching forward. The blizzard raged around me as I sped down the road, praying I wasn't driving deeper into something worse. And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw her, sitting in my back seat, still smiling.